Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thomas stood in a shadowy corner of the Forrester design office, the late afternoon light piercing through the blinds like accusations. His sketchpad was open on the table, undisturbed for hours, and the pencil balanced dangerously on the edge, as if it, too, had given up. Luna's laughter, bright, carefree, alive, reminded him of the morning she'd twirled through the room in one of his half-finished gowns, the silk reflecting the sun like water. He had promised her the world and whispered it on her temple while the rest were eating lunch. One day, he said, I'll get you out of here. Somewhere the air does not smell like deadlines and disappointment. She had believed him. Of course she did. Luna believed in everything. Second chances, the redemptive power of a perfect hemline, and the myth that love could be stitched together like fabric with the right thread. The promise curdled in his mouth. He had meant what he said. That was the worst part. He had imagined a future in which the two of them slipped out the back door of Forrester Creations, past the surveillance cameras and talking interns, into a city that knew neither their names nor their misdeeds. He imagined her hand in his, little and steady, as she squeezed when she was afraid. He imagined a quiet restaurant in Silver Lake where the waiter didn't care who designed whose clothing, where they could eat tacos and cheap wine and pretend the past was just a pattern to cut away. But promises, Thomas discovered, were just another type of design. Beautiful on the bolt but impractical to wear without changes. The condition had struck him in the middle of the night, when he saw the ultrasound photo hidden inside Luna's sketchbook like a secret panel. The image looked grainy and clinical, but the curve was distinct. A lifetime. His life. Hers. Theirs. The date was an accusation in and of itself, conceived in the feverish weeks following Paris, when grief and guilt had braided themselves into something resembling passion. He had stared at the little comma of a form until his eyes burned and the word parent rearranged into failure. He could not leave now. Not with this. Not until he repaired what he'd broken first. So, here he wrote his commitment. One horrific condition, he convinced himself, would make it true. One sacrifice to balance the balances. Luna discovered him at dusk, her footsteps gentle across the smooth concrete. She was still wearing the yellow sundress she had worn in the morning, but the excitement had drained out, leaving the cloth limp. Her eyes, those silly, eager eyes, searched his face for the Thomas who had previously drawn constellations on her wrist with a dressmaker's pencil. You said tonight, she muttered. You said we'd go. I know. His voice cracked like cheap satin. But there's something I need you to do first. She was still waiting. Luna was skilled at waiting. She had waited for her mother to return from rehab, for her father's name to cease being used as a jest, and for Thomas to pick her over Hope's ghost. Thomas reached into his pocket and took out the small velvet box. Not a ring, God, not yet, but a key. Old brass, weighty, the type that opened doors to places people had forgotten existed. This, he explained, placing it into her palm, unlocks the basement archive. The one Steffi sealed after the previous embezzlement scandal. Luna's fingers curled around the metal, yet her brow furrowed. The archive. Thomas, it is forbidden. I understand. He swallowed. There is a file down there. Red leather with gold lettering. Forrester Blackburn merger, 1998. Inside is a contract signed by my father on the night your mother overdosed. He offered her a portion of the company if she kept silent about everything.
About me.
About what I did when I was too young to know better. Luna's breath caught. Everyone had heard murmurs, but she had never seen them in this shape. I need you to find it, Thomas said, his words pouring quicker, as if speed might overcome shame. And I need you to burn it. The silence between them was thin and menacing. Burn it, she reiterated. The key cut into her skin. If that contract comes to light, it will permanently bind our families together. The board will utilize it to prevent any future I attempt to construct here. They'll claim I'm just my father's kid, paying for his mistakes with corporate funds. And you, his voice broke again. They will say you are the proof. The living consequence. Luna stared down at the key, as if it would bite her. You've asked me to erase evidence. To commit a crime. For you. For us, he added, but even he found the statement empty. For the baby. So we may leave it clean. So no one can ever claim we don't deserve this. She chuckled, making a sound similar to fabric ripping. Clean? Thomas, nothing about us is ever clean. We began in lies. We began in agony, he responded. And I'm trying to end it differently. Luna took a step closer, close enough for him to smell the orange flower in her hair, the same aroma that had lingered on his bedding for weeks. You promised to take me out, she explained quietly. Not to send me into the darkness to burn the past, so you can live with it. Thomas reached out for her, but she flinched. The action was slight and involuntary, but it cut him open. I can't do this without you, he explained. You were never with me, she responded. You were considering an escape. And now you want me to be the match. The studio lights flickered, as someone in accounting turned off the floors for the night. Luna's features appeared older and sharper in the dim light. She was 23 and had grown tired of being the secret. Keep the key, Thomas stated. Think about it. Midnight. I will be waiting near the service elevator. If you arrive, we'll depart right after. If you don't. He couldn't finish. Luna slid the key into her pocket and went away without saying anything further. The door closed with a gentle click, like a seam giving way. Thomas slumped into the drafting chair, head in his hands. He'd calculated everything but the cost of asking her to bear his guilt. Luna did not go home. She walked the length of Rodeo Drive until the storefront windows blurred and the key in her pocket felt like a tumor. She remembered her mother, who had passed out on the bathroom tiles while lawyers debated over percentages. She considered the baby, still just a flutter, a secret heartbeat, and how every decision she made now would become its first memory. At 11:47 p.m., she stood outside the Forrester building. The security guard waved her through. She was still family, with a badge that opened doors. The elevator to the basement smelt like dust and old money. The archive was just as Thomas described, rows of filing cabinets resembling tombstones, the air dense with the odor of yellowing paper. She discovered the red leather file in the third drawer, with gold letters flaking like dried skin. There is a photograph inside, as well as the contract. A boy, perhaps 15, stands with a woman, Luna's eyes and grin already crumbling. On the back, in faded ink, it says, "Forgive me." Luna's hands shook. She had come to burn, but the matchbook seemed heavier than the file. She imagined Thomas upstairs, waiting with his perfect escape plan. She thought about the baby, who would never know life without this weight. At 11:59, she made her decision. Thomas looked at his watch for the 100th time. The service elevator stayed stubbornly closed. He had a duffel bag over his shoulder, containing passports, cash, and 2 plane tickets to Lisbon, where no one knew the Forrester name. He had rehearsed the speech. We will start over. We will be better. The clock ticked past midnight. The elevator chimed. Luna stepped out, but she didn't have the file. Her hands were empty except for a single, little folded sheet of paper. Her eyes were red and dry. I couldn't do it, she replied. Thomas's heart dropped. Luna, I couldn't burn the truth, she explained. But I could rewrite it. She unfurled the paper. It was an image of young Thomas and her mother. On the back, in her own handwriting, "We forgive you. Now, forgive yourself." She pushed it into his hand. This is what you carry with you. Not me. Not the baby. Just this. He focused on the words, the precise loops of her calligraphy. Are you leaving? I'm staying, she clarified. This is for me. For the life I'm making, which will not be defined by your crimes. Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The duffel bag dropped off his shoulder and thudded to the floor like a body. Luna got back inside the elevator. The doors started to close. Wait, he said, lunging forward. The promise. You kept it, she whispered gently as the doors closed. You got me out, just not in the way you expected. The elevator fell. Thomas stood alone on the loading dock, the photograph trembling in his fist. A filing cabinet door banged shut, finally and irreversibly. He never saw Luna again. Years later, tourists in Lisbon claimed they saw a man sketching on the beach before daybreak, his lines frenetic and searching. He always worked alone, leaving before the sun had fully risen, as if light were a judgment. In Los Angeles, a small girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stern jaw learned to sew under the forester's roof. She never inquired about the man in the images that her mother kept in a locked drawer. Some patterns, Luna told her, were designed to be broken apart and rebuilt into something that fit. The archive key was melted and converted into a thimble. Luna used it daily. It never scorched her. Thomas sat on the edge of the ancient pier, gazing at the ocean, which had become silver in the dying light. The wind lifted his hair and whispered in the reeds. He could hear Luna's laughter ringing faintly behind him, like the remembrance of brightness on a cold day. But Luna wasn't present. Not really. Not anymore. He had once promised her the world, promising to lift her out of the darkness she had been stuck in and give her a life she had never imagined. But promises are heavy, and some crush those who bear them. It began a year ago, in a modest art gallery in Los Angeles. Thomas had been displaying his first series of portraits of people who were broken, raw, and authentic. He'd drawn features he'd never forget, and eyes that seemed to follow him long after he'd put away his brushes. Among the crowd of critics and curious onlookers stood Luna, quiet and lost, her hands clasped together as if she was afraid to touch anything. She wasn't attractive in the conventional sense, but there was something about her that drew people in, a delicate genuineness, a trembling kind of hope. She had come not for the art, but for the silence. She stated she disliked loud lights and being noticed, but she had stood in front of his painting of a girl in a cracked mirror for over an hour. When Thomas approached her, she just said, "That's what it feels like." He was perplexed at first. "What does it feel like?" "To look at yourself," she said, her gaze remaining fixated on the reflection in the paint. That marked the beginning. Thomas felt lured to her realm of solitude. Luna lived in a little apartment on the outskirts of town, surrounded by ancient plants, unwashed teacups, and heaps of novels she'd never finished. She rarely discussed her background, except to mention she used to dance before the accident, which took her little brother and her ability to walk without pain. She claimed to have been living in half-light ever since. She only went out when the streets were deserted and the sky was gloomy. Thomas would pay her frequent visits. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he brought canvases and painted while she watched. They didn't need to say anything. Their silence screamed volumes. Over time, he noticed something stirring in her, a faint flicker of life, a fragile trust. When he finally told her that he intended to help her come out, to reintegrate her into society, she didn't laugh or resist. She simply glanced at him with a tired smile and asked, "Why?" "Because you deserve to be seen," he replied. But he didn't tell her the other reason. She reminded him of his sister, whom he had failed to save years before. That he was tormented by the sight of her car falling into the river while he stood impotent on the bank, the water swallowing her cries. He hadn't forgiven himself. He imagined that helping Luna would be his atonement. He spent weeks working with her. He took her to quiet parks before dawn, to galleries before they opened, and to cafes with just 3 customers at a time. Each stride forward was little, sensitive, and real. He watched her grin again, looking at the world rather than away from it. Then one morning, she informed him that she wanted to dance. They visited the abandoned theater near the harbor. Dust floats like stars across the air. She stood barefoot on the cracked wooden floor, putting her cane aside. The music came from his phone, sluggish, broken piano chords that filled the silence. She walked gently, as if her bones were about to crumble with each movement, but her frailty was graceful. She wasn't dancing for anyone but herself. Thomas painted Luna that night, from memory, with her arms raised toward a shaft of light, her shadow trailing after her like wings. He titled the picture Resurgence, and had no idea it would become so well known. But when a well-known collector saw it and offered to present it in New York, Thomas hesitated. The story was Luna's, not his. However, the promise of success and notoriety was difficult to resist. He convinced himself that exposing her to the world was exactly what she needed, that this was how she would finally come out. When he told her, Luna's face transformed. The sparkle in her eyes faded. "Are you going to show me to them?" she asked gently. "Not you, your strength," he stressed. "They must see that beauty can emerge from pain." She stared at him for a long time. "What if I don't want people to see my pain?" He didn't say anything. He didn't know how to express the hunger that drove him, the want to make her misery meaningful, to make his own guilt meaningful. So he told her she could decide, and that he would only display it if she consented. She did not respond that night. Days have passed. Luna withdrew again, skipping their walks and not returning his calls. When he eventually arrived at her flat, everything was vacant save for the subtle scent of lavender and turpentine. On the table was a note scribbled in small, shaky letters. "Thomas, you can bring me out, but not like this. Don't let them see my pain. Show them yours." He didn't realize it until the news arrived. An accident on the pier, a woman's body discovered in the water. Initially, there was no identification, but he knew. He dashed to the harbor, his lungs burning and his heart hammering with denial. As they hauled her out, the world appeared to crumble into gray noise. The same river that had stolen his sister had also snatched Luna. She was dressed in the same white outfit that she had worn to the dance. At the hospital, the doctor said it was probably an accident. She had slid, possibly lost her balance. But the message stated differently. Luna had written another phrase on the reverse that he had never noticed before. "Thomas, the world does not need to see me. It needs to see what you're hiding." He was unable to use a brush for several weeks. The picture, Resurgence, sat against the wall, its face turned away, as if humiliated. People kept calling, journalists, galleries, and critics. They wanted to know about the mysterious muse who inspired tragedy. He disregarded them all. Then one night, unable to sleep, he returned to the theater where she had performed. The air was moist and frigid. Her cane was still leaning against the wall. In the dim moonlight, he believed he saw her moving across the dust, light as breath. And he heard her voice, soft and clear. "Show them yours." That's when he realized. He spent the following 3 months painting. Not beautiful, not grace, not redemption. He painted his guilt, the night his sister drowned, how he'd watched helplessly as the headlights dipped beneath the surface, the sound of water closing in on her scream. He also painted Luna, but not in the way she had been. He depicted her standing in the river, looking at him with sadness and reaching for his hand as he turned away. He named the collection The Condition. When it was ultimately displayed, he declined interviews. The critics described it as eerie, tragic, and raw. They described it as a confession or reckoning. They had no idea that each painting was a chat with the deceased, specifically his sister Luna, and all the commitments he had broken. On the first night, a woman approached him discreetly, her eyes red from sobbing. "Your picture," she continued. "It reminded me of my son. I lost him 5 years ago. But I felt understood." She grabbed his hand. Thomas smiled as he said, "Thank you." "You shouldn't thank me," he replied. "Thank her." After the gallery closed, he returned to the dock. The night was peaceful, and the lake was dark and still. He sat in the same spot he had been months before, where her body had been discovered. He had Luna's folded note in his pocket, which was worn around the edges. He read it again, the words fading but yet alive. "You can bring me out, Thomas, but not like this. Don't let them see my pain. Show them yours." He muttered to the breeze, "I did it, Luna. I finally did." The moonlight rippled over the water surface. For a brief time, he believed he saw her again, barefoot, smiling, her white dress rippling like mist. Then the image disintegrated in the waves. He did not go home that night. He stayed till morning broke over the horizon, and the first birds called from the coast. When the sun came up, he felt something relax in his chest. Not serenity, precisely, but release. He could still sense her presence, gentle and distant, but no longer accusing. I'm just watching. Years have passed. Thomas became well known for his artwork, but he never mentioned Luna in public. Others dismissed her as a rumor, a ghost behind the canvas. Only he knew the truth. Each artwork he created was still part of his vow. Bring her out. To portray her as a metamorphosis rather than a tragedy. One winter evening, long after renown had faded, Thomas received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph, which he had never seen before. It showed Luna when she was younger, smiling with a tiny kid who resembled her. On the back, 4 words were written neatly. She would be proud. He wasn't sure who had sent it. Perhaps someone from her past? Perhaps no one at all. But he framed the photograph and hung it on his studio wall. Every time he painted, he looked at her face and remembered that art was about expressing what was human rather than what was beautiful. Sometimes what is human is awful. That night, he completed one final piece. There are no models. There's no reference. Just memories, water, and light. The painting depicted a guy standing on a pier under the moon, grasping for the reflection of a woman emerging from the sea. Their hands did not contact, but their eyes did, and that was plenty. He titled it The Promise. People wept as the exhibition opened. Some considered it his greatest achievement. Others described it as a farewell. They were both correct. Thomas did not attend the opening. He was already gone, and no one knew where. Some reported he'd gone to the coast, while others said he vanished peacefully, as if he'd finally paid his duty. The reality was simple. He had gone to find peace, the type that comes from understanding rather than success or absolution. The pier survives. The river maintained its secrets. However, when the fog cleared at daybreak, fishermen claimed to see a figure sitting at the edge, sketching in a little notebook. A woman in white would stand behind him, looking out at the horizon. They would vanish at the first dawn. Maybe it was simply a mist. Perhaps there was something more. But those who understood the narrative and had watched The Promise believed it. Promises, even broken ones, have a way of coming to an end. Even in times of grief, love has a way of returning. Not as joy, but as truth. And in that truth, they both survived.